The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled the Orion Spur for 12,000 cycles, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species they could not conquer, absorb, or destroy with ease. Commander Talvex stood at the center of the bridge aboard the scout vessel Serenity of Purpose, his four eyes scanning the holographic display that floated before him like a window into the cosmos. His scales shimmered with the deep purple color of confidence, a biological response that his species had evolved over millions of years to display dominance and calm. Today was supposed to be a routine patrol along the edge of Valkyrie territory. Nothing more than a simple survey mission to catalog any new developments in the region. "Commander," called out Navigation Officer Krelinus from her station at the far end of the bridge, "our sensors have detected an unknown vessel, approximately 2 light cycles from our current position." Talvex turned his long neck toward her, his mandibles clicking with mild interest rather than concern. Unknown vessels were not uncommon in this sector of space, as many primitive species had begun their first fumbling attempts at space travel in recent centuries. Most of them never made it past their own solar systems, and those that did were quickly cataloged and either ignored or marked for future conquest. "Display the vessel," Talvex commanded, and the holographic screen shifted to show an image of the ship in question. What appeared before them was a vessel of crude construction, built from dense metals and sharp angles that seemed almost aggressive in their design. Valkyrie had long ago moved past such primitive materials. Their ships grown from living crystal that healed itself and flowed like water when needed. This alien ship looked like something a child might build from rocks and scrap metal. "How primitive," remarked Science Officer Yelinus, her voice carrying the tone of bored superiority that came naturally to all. Valkyrie, when observing lesser species, she was the youngest member of the bridge crew, but her 4 hearts beat with the same ancient pride that flowed through all of their kind. "Shall I initiate a bioscan, Commander?" she asked, already moving toward her console with the assumption that he would agree. Talvex waved one of his 4 arms in a gesture of permission. Bioscans were standard procedure when encountering unknown vessels, as they allowed the Valkyrie to learn everything about a new species within moments. Their scanning technology was the most advanced in the known galaxy, capable of reading genetic codes, biological functions, psychological patterns, and even the emotional states of any living creature. "Begin the scan," Talvex ordered, settling back into his command chair with the relaxed posture of someone who expected nothing interesting. He had performed this same ritual hundreds of times throughout his career, and it always ended the same way. They would discover some fragile silicon-based life form or delicate crystalline beings, creatures so weak that a single Valkyrie warrior could defeat dozens of them in combat. The Valkyrie had evolved as the perfect predators of their home world, their bodies designed for strength, speed, and endurance that no other known species could match, or so they had always believed. Scanning beam lanced out from the Serenity of Purpose, invisible to most sensors but capable of penetrating any hull material known to exist. It swept through the alien vessel in waves, reading every molecule, every cell, every heartbeat of the creatures within the data began streaming back to Yelinus' console, and she watched the information flow with the same casual interest she always displayed then. Her scales turned white in Valkyrie biology. White scales indicated only one thing: absolute terror. "Science Officer," Talvex said, noticing the change immediately. "Report your findings." Yelinus did not respond at first, her 4 eyes locked on the data scrolling across her screen as if she could not believe what she was reading. Her mandibles had stopped moving entirely, frozen in an expression that Talvex had never seen on any Valkyrie face before. "Yelinus," he barked, rising from his chair with sudden concern. "What do you see?" "Commander," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible across the bridge. The creatures aboard that vessel. They are not like anything we have ever encountered. Talvex moved to stand beside her, his own scales beginning to shift toward paler shades as her fear infected him through the emotional bonds that all Valkyrie shared. He looked at the data on her screen, and his 4 hearts began to beat faster. The creatures called themselves humans, according to the intercepted communications that the scan had also captured. They were bipedal beings with 2 arms, 2 eyes, and a single heart that pumped red blood through their bodies. At first glance, they seemed almost laughably simple compared to the Valkyrie, but the biological data told a very different story. These humans were apex predators from a world that seemed designed to kill them. Their planet was covered in extreme environments ranging from frozen wastelands to burning deserts, from crushing ocean depths to toxic volcanic regions, and the humans had not just survived these conditions. They had conquered them all. Look at their evolutionary history, Yelena said, her voice trembling as she scrolled through the data. They are persistence hunters. Commander, Talvex felt his scales turn another shade. Lighter persistence hunting was a method of killing prey that was considered mythological among most species. Too brutal and exhausting to be real. It involved chasing prey not to catch it quickly, but to chase it until it collapsed from exhaustion. The predator did not need to be faster than its prey. It simply needed to never stop following. They would chase animals across their plains for hours, Yelenis continued, sometimes for entire days, never stopping, never resting, until their prey simply fell down and died from exhaustion. That is not possible, Krelinis said from her navigation station, her own scales now pale with fear. No creature could sustain such effort. Their bodies are designed for it, Yelenis replied, pulling up more data. They have a cooling system built into their skin that allows them to regulate their temperature while running, something almost no other species possesses. She highlighted another section of the scan results, and look at this. Their skeletal structure is capable of repairing itself after damage. Their immune system actively hunts and destroys foreign organisms inside their bodies. And they possess a chemical compound called adrenaline that temporarily makes them stronger, faster, and resistant to pain. Commander Talvex stared at the data in silence, his mind struggling to process what he was learning. The Valkyrie had always believed themselves to be the ultimate predators, the apex of evolution in this galaxy. But these humans, these strange and primitive-looking creatures, they were something else entirely. They were monsters wearing the flesh of people. There is more, Yelenis said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Commander, the humans aboard that vessel are not in stasis. This revelation struck Talvex harder than all the others combined. Every spacefaring species in the known galaxy kept their crews in stasis during long voyages through the void. Space was too vast, too empty, too maddening for any creature to endure while conscious the endless black. The crushing silence, the knowledge that you were floating through an infinite nothing with only a thin hole between you and instant death. These things broke minds. Even the Valkyrie, with their legendary mental discipline, could not travel through space while awake for more than a few cycles before the void began to crack their sanity. But the humans were awake. They were eating together in a communal area, talking and laughing as if floating through the empty void was the most natural thing in the world. Some of them were sleeping in small rooms, but not in stasis pods. In simple beds with blankets and pillows. Others were exercising in a large open space, deliberately pushing their bodies to physical exhaustion for no apparent reason. And the most disturbing detail of all, the ship had windows, real windows, made of transparent material that allowed the humans to look directly out into the void whenever they wished. They stare into the black, Yelenis whispered, and they do it for enjoyment. Commander Talvex stepped back from the console, his 4 hearts now pounding so hard he could hear them in his own skull. He had spent his entire career believing that the Valkyrie were the masters of the galaxy, that no species could ever threaten their dominion. But now, looking at the data from that crude metal ship floating in the darkness ahead, he was not so sure anymore. These humans were not just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. They were something far more terrifying. They were survivors, hunters, and creatures who laughed in the face of the void itself, and the Valkyrie had just announced their presence by scanning them. Science Officer Yelenis could not stop her mandibles from trembling as she continued to read through the biological data streaming across her console in her 40 cycles of service to the Valkyrie Dominion. She had scanned thousands of alien species, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses with the cold efficiency expected of her positions. She had seen creatures made of living stone, beings that existed as pure energy, and organisms that could survive in the vacuum of space itself. None of them had frightened her like these humans. "Commander Talvex," she called out, her voice cracking in ways she had never experienced before. "I need you to see this additional data." The commander moved back to her station, his scales still pale from the initial revelations, but his posture showing the forced calm of a leader trying to maintain control. The other bridge officers had gathered closer as well, their own fear creating a thick emotional atmosphere that pressed against everyone through their shared Valkyrie bond. "What else have you found?" Talvex asked, though his tone suggested he was not certain he wanted to know the answer. Alaz pulled up a new section of the scan results. This one focused on the internal chemistry of the human body. "Their biology is a weapon," she began, highlighting various compounds that the scan had detected. "They produce natural chemicals that other species must synthesize in laboratories." She pointed to the first compound on the list. "This is adrenaline, which I mentioned before, but I did not explain its full effects. When a human experiences fear or anger or excitement, their body floods itself with this chemical automatically." "What does it do?" asked Krelinus from across the bridge. "It increases their heart rate, sending more blood to their muscles. It dilates their pupils, allowing them to see better. It numbs their pain receptors, allowing them to continue fighting through injuries that would incapacitate any Valkyrie. And it sharpens their mental focus, making them think faster and react quicker." Yelenis paused, letting this information sink in before continuing. "In essence, when a human is frightened or threatened, they become temporarily more dangerous, not less." Commander Talvex made a sound low in his throat that indicated deep unease among the Valkyrie and every other species they had encountered. Fear was a weakening emotion that made creatures easier to defeat. The idea that fear could make something stronger was deeply unsettling to everything the Valkyrie understood about biology. "That is not all," Yelenis continued, scrolling to the next section of data. "Humans also produce a compound called endorphins, which creates feelings of pleasure and euphoria in response to physical exertion and pain." "They feel pleasure from pain?" Talvex asked, his voice carrying obvious disbelief. "Not exactly," Yelenis explained. "The endorphins are released to help them push through pain, to keep functioning when their body should be telling them to stop. But the practical effect is that humans can become addicted to activities that cause them physical suffering." She brought up examples from the ship's internal sensors. "Look at this. Several of the humans aboard that vessel are currently engaged in something called exercise, which involves deliberately stressing their muscles and cardiovascular systems to the point of exhaustion." The display showed humans running on machines that went nowhere, lifting heavy objects repeatedly for no practical purpose, and striking padded targets with their fists and feet. "They are hurting themselves," Cronus observed. "Why would any creature do this willingly? Because when they damage their muscles in this way, the muscles repair themselves and grow back stronger," Yelenis explained. "Their entire biology is built around the concept of destruction and reconstruction. She pulled up another data set. This one showing the human skeletal system. Their bones work the same way. If a human bone breaks, it will heal itself over time, and the healed section will often be stronger than it was before the break. They can recover from broken bones? Talvex asked, his horror growing with each new revelation. They can recover from almost anything. Yelenis confirmed. Their bodies are capable of healing wounds that would kill any Velkari. They can survive the loss of limbs, the failure of organs, and damage that should be fatal. She highlighted a section of the medical database that the scan had captured from the human ship. According to their own records, humans have survived being impaled through vital organs, falling from great heights, exposure to extreme temperatures, and even being struck by lightning. Lightning? Repeated one of the junior officers, his voice barely a whisper. The electrical discharge from storm clouds? Yes, Yelenis confirmed. Humans have been struck by lightning and survived. Some have survived multiple strikes. The bridge fell silent as everyone tried to process this information. But there is something even more disturbing, Yelenis said. And the fact that anything could be more disturbing than what she had already. Shared made several officers shift. Nervously at their stations, she changed the display to show a comparison between Velkari and human stress responses. As I mentioned, every spacefaring species we have encountered travels in stasis, because conscious exposure to the void causes psychological breakdown. This is true for the Velkari, the Quarren, the methane singers, and every other intelligent species we have cataloged, but not for humans. Talvex finished, his voice heavy with dread. Not for humans, Yelenis agreed. The scan shows that these humans have been traveling through space while fully conscious for 3 of their planetary cycles. 3 cycles? Krelinus gasped. That is impossible. Their minds should have shattered within the first few rotations. That is what we would expect, Yelenis said. But humans have a psychological characteristic that we have never seen in any other species. She pulled up the relevant data, her mandibles clicking nervously as she did so. They adapt to horror. Their minds are capable of normalizing almost any situation, no matter how terrible or unnatural it may be. She showed examples from human history that the scan had captured from their databanks. Humans have lived through wars that killed millions of their own kind, through plagues that wiped out vast portions of their population, through natural disasters that destroyed entire cities. And after each of these events, they simply continued on with their lives. They just continued? Talvex asked. They rebuilt, they reproduced, and they forgot. Or rather, they did not forget, but they learned to live with the memory without being destroyed by it. Yelenis brought up psychological profiles of some of the humans aboard the ship. This one here, a female designated as Lieutenant Chun, witnessed the death of 17 of her crewmates during a previous mission when their ship was struck by debris. She now sleeps peacefully every night in a ship, no different from the one where she watched her friends die. And this one, she continued, highlighting another profile, a male designated as Sergeant Morrison, was involved in a combat engagement where he personally killed over 40 enemy combatants. He shows no signs of psychological trauma and describes the experience as something he is simply trained to do. Commander Talvex felt something cold settling into his 4 hearts. A fear unlike anything he had experienced in his long career. They are broken, he said, trying to rationalize what he was hearing. Their minds must be damaged in some fundamental way. No, Commander, Yelenis replied, her voice soft with the terrible certainty of scientific truth. They are not broken. They are built this way. She pulled up one final piece of data, something that she had saved for last because it frightened her more than anything else. Commander, the humans have a concept that does not translate perfectly into our language, but the closest approximation would be finding meaning in suffering. What does that mean? Talvex asked. It means that humans do not simply endure hardship. They often seek it out deliberately because they believe it makes them stronger and more complete. She showed examples from human culture. Individuals who voluntarily subjected themselves to extreme cold, extreme heat, extreme physical exertion, and extreme danger. They climb their tallest mountains not because anything useful waits at the top, but simply because the climb is difficult. They dive into their deepest oceans, knowing they might die, because they want to see what is there. They travel to the most hostile regions of their planet and try to survive, not for any practical purpose, but because they want to test themselves. Yelenis turned to face Commander Talvex directly, her four eyes meeting his four eyes in a gaze of shared terror. "Commander, they have windows on their ship, not despite the void, but because of it. They look into the infinite blackness that would drive any Valkyrie insane. And they find it beautiful." She paused, her mandibles finally still. "These humans, they are not a species that simply tolerates fear and pain and horror. They are a species that embraces these things, that draws strength from them, that uses them to fuel their drive to survive and conquer." Commander Talvex stood in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had learned. The Valkyrie Dominion had built its empire on the foundation that they were the strongest, the most resilient, the most dangerous species in the galaxy. But now, looking at the data from this single primitive ship floating in the darkness, Talvex was forced to confront a terrible truth. The humans were not another species waiting to be conquered. They were something far worse. They were the monsters that even monsters should fear. And the Valkyrie had just drawn. Commander Talvex turned away from Science Officer Yelenis and her horrifying biological data, his mind racing with the implications of everything he had learned. The humans aboard that ship were nightmare creatures wrapped in deceptively fragile-looking flesh. But perhaps their vessel itself would reveal some weakness that the Valkyrie could exploit. "Navigation Officer Krellinus," he commanded, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fear that churned in his four stomachs. "Conduct a detailed analysis of the alien vessel itself. Focus on structural weaknesses, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities." "Yes, Commander," Krellinus replied. Her scales still pale, but her movements professional as she turned to her console and began the secondary scan. The bridge fell silent as the data began streaming in, each officer watching their own displays for information that might offer some hope against the terrifying species they had just discovered. Talvex had commanded the Serenity of Purpose for 20 cycles, and in all that time, he had never felt the weight of uncertainty that now pressed down upon him. "Commander," Krellinus said after several moments, her voice carrying a new tone that Talvex could not immediately identify. "The structural analysis is complete. Report your findings," Talvex ordered. Moving to stand beside her console, the alien vessel is constructed primarily from dense metal alloys, Krellinus began. "Materials that the Valkyrie stopped using thousands of cycles ago because they are heavy, inflexible, and prone to catastrophic failure under stress. Then their ship is primitive and weak," one of the junior officers said hopefully. "Surely our weapons could destroy it easily." Krellinus did not respond immediately, her four eyes fixed on the data before her. "The materials are primitive by our standards," she finally said. "But the design philosophy is something I have never encountered." She brought up a three-dimensional model of the human ship, its crude angles and harsh lines looking almost aggressive compared to the smooth, organic curves of Valkyrie vessels. "Our ships are designed to avoid damage," Krellinus explained. "We use living crystal that heals itself, shields that deflect weapons fire, and evasive capabilities that allow us to retreat from any engagement we cannot win." She highlighted sections of the human vessel as she continued. "This ship is designed to survive damage, not avoid it. Look at the internal structure. The model shifted to show the interior of the human vessel, revealing a maze of compartments, corridors, and sealed sections that made Talvex think of the hive structures of certain insect species. The ship is divided into over 300 separate compartments, Krelinus said. Each one can be individually sealed, pressurized, or vented into space independent of the others. Why would they design their ship this way? Yelinus asked, moving closer to examine the model. Because they expect their ship to be damaged, Krelinus replied. They expect entire sections to be destroyed, breached, or rendered uninhabitable. And when that happens, they simply seal off the damaged areas and continue fighting from what remains. She zoomed in on one particular section of the ship. This area here appears to be their primary command center. Notice how it is surrounded by 3 layers of additional compartments, each one serving as a barrier between the command center and the outer hull. They use their own ship as a shield, Talvex observed, beginning to understand the grim logic of the design. Exactly, Krelinus confirmed. They have built redundancy into every system. If one power source fails, another takes over. If one life support unit is destroyed, 3 others continue functioning. If their primary weapons are disabled, secondary and tertiary systems activate automatically. She pulled up the weapon systems data, and her scale shifted to an even paler shade. Commander, I need to show you their armaments. The display changed to highlight the weapons mounted on the human vessel, and Talvex felt his 4 hearts skip in sequence. These are kinetic weapons, Krelinus said, pointing to the largest turrets on the ship. They fire solid projectiles, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. Kinetic weapons, Talvex repeated. Those are considered primitive even by pre-spacefaring civilizations. Primitive but terrifying, Krelinus replied. A single projectile from one of these weapons carries more destructive energy than 10 of our plasma lances combined. It relies on simple physics rather than complex technology, which means there is nothing to jam, nothing to deflect, and nothing to disable. She highlighted the next weapon system. These appear to be missile launchers. The missiles themselves are equipped with something the humans call nuclear warheads. Nuclear technology, Yelinus whispered. They harness the power of atomic destruction and mounted it on weapons. Each warhead is capable of destroying a vessel, the size of the Serenity of Purpose with a single strike, Krelinus continued. And they have over 200 such missiles aboard this one ship. Talvex stared at the display in silence, trying to comprehend a species that would build such instruments of annihilation. The Valkyrie had nuclear technology as well, but they used it only for power generation and industrial applications. The idea of weaponizing it was considered barbaric even by their standards. There is more, Krelinus said, and Talvex wondered if he would survive this briefing with his sanity intact. They also have directed energy weapons, point defense systems, electronic warfare suites, and something designated in their records as a last resort protocol. What is that? Talvex asked, dreading the answer. Krelinus pulled up the relevant data, her mandibles clicking nervously. If the ship is about to be captured or destroyed, the crew has the ability to trigger a self-destruct sequence that will overload their main reactor and create an explosion large enough to destroy everything within 10,000 units of distance. They would destroy themselves to destroy their enemy, one of the junior officers asked, his voice trembling. According to their records, yes, Krelinus confirmed. They have a phrase for it. If they are going to burn, they will ensure their enemy burns with them. The bridge fell into a heavy silence that pressed against everyone like a physical weight. But Krelinus was not finished. Commander, I need to show you the most disturbing section of their ship. She zoomed the model to an area near the belly of the human vessel. A section that contained rows of small craft lined up in organized formation. These are designated as boarding craft, she said. Small vessels designed to carry human soldiers from the ship to an enemy vessel during combat. Boarding craft, Talvex repeated. They intend to physically invade enemy ships while combat is still ongoing. Yes, Commander. According to their tactical records, humans do not simply destroy enemy vessels from a distance. They send soldiers to capture them. She pulled up images of human soldiers in what the records described as combat armor. Thick suits of metal and synthetic materials that covered their bodies from head to foot. Equipped with weapons, tools, and life support systems, these soldiers are trained to breach enemy hulls, fight through hostile environments, and engage enemy crew in direct physical combat. Direct physical combat, Yelena said slowly. They want to fight face-to-face, hand-to-hand, inside enemy ships that may be burning or venting atmosphere. Correct, Krellinus confirmed. The humans consider this one of the most effective tactics for neutralizing enemy vessels, without destroying valuable resources or technology. Commander Talvex looked at the images of the human soldiers. These armored monsters, who deliberately put themselves in the most dangerous possible situations because they believed they could survive and win. Show me their medical facilities, he ordered. A terrible suspicion forming in his mind, Krellinus brought up the section of the ship designated as the medical bay. And what Talvex saw there confirmed his worst fears. The facility was not designed for gentle recovery or careful treatment. It was designed for rapid repairs to damaged human bodies so that they could return to combat as quickly as possible. There were surgical tools designed for speed rather than precision, stocks of synthetic blood and artificial organs, and row after row of devices that the records described as automated surgical pods. They can replace damaged limbs with mechanical alternatives, Krellinus said, highlighting one section. They can seal wounds with chemical foam that hardens in seconds, replace failing organs with artificial versions, and inject their soldiers with compounds that suppress pain, fear, and exhaustion. But the detail that truly horrified Talvex was found in a storage area near the surgical pods. What are those? He asked, pointing to rows of compact cases labeled with simple numerical designation squares. Check the records. And when she looked up, her scales had turned completely white. Those are field amputation kits. Commander, field amputation kits, Talvex repeated, not understanding if a human soldier is wounded in a way that cannot be quickly repaired. Another soldier can use these kits to remove the damaged limb and seal the wound within minutes. She paused, struggling to continue. The wounded human would then be expected to continue fighting with whatever limbs they had remaining. The bridge crew stared at the display in stunned silence. They keep fighting even after losing limbs, one officer whispered. They just cut off what is broken and keep going. Commander Talvex stepped back from the console, his mind reeling with everything he had learned. The humans were not simply dangerous because of their biology or their psychology. They were dangerous because they had built their entire society around the concept of service. Commander Talvex ordered communications officer Rentek to access the human ship's databanks and translate everything they could find about human history and culture, perhaps somewhere in the records of this terrifying species. There would be some indication of weakness, some vulnerability that the Velkari could exploit if conflict became inevitable. Ventak was the oldest member of the bridge crew, a veteran of countless first contact situations who had translated thousands of alien languages throughout his career. He worked in silence for what felt like an eternity, his multiple limbs dancing across his console as he fed the human data through the ship's translation matrices. Finally, he turned to face Commander Talvex, and the expression on his face made Talvex's four hearts clench with dread. Commander, Rentak said, his voice carrying a weight that Talvex had never heard from the normally unflappable communications officer. I have completed the preliminary translation of the Human Historical Database. Report your findings, Talvex ordered. Though part of him wanted to refuse the information and simply flee this sector of space, Forever Vrentak took a moment to compose himself. His scales shifting through several shades of pale before settling on a color that indicated profound disturbance. The humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history, he began. Not occasional conflicts or minor territorial disputes. Constant, unending warfare that has touched every generation since they first developed the ability to record events. They fight among themselves? Science Officer Yelenis asked. That seems counterproductive for species survival. It would be for any other species, Vrentak agreed. But for humans, constant warfare has served as an engine of evolution and advancement. He pulled up a timeline of human history, displaying it on the main bridge screen so that all officers could see. Look at this. Every major technological advancement in human history has been connected to warfare in some way. He highlighted various points on the timeline. They discovered how to shape metal and immediately used it to create weapons. They developed agriculture and used the resulting population growth to build larger armies. They harnessed the power of chemistry and created explosives. They split the atom and immediately used it to destroy entire cities. They used nuclear weapons against their own kind? Navigation Officer Krellinis asked, her voice horrified. Twice, Vrentak confirmed. During a conflict they call the Second World War, humans deployed nuclear weapons against two of their own population centers, killing hundreds of thousands of their own species in mere moments. The bridge fell silent as everyone tried to comprehend a species capable of such destruction. But here is the truly disturbing element. Vrentak continued. After those attacks, the humans did not abandon nuclear technology. They built more weapons, thousands more, enough to destroy their entire planet many times over. Why would they do such a thing? Talvex asked. Because they believed that having enough weapons to destroy everything would prevent anyone from using them. Vrentak explained. They called it mutually assured destruction. The idea that if everyone knows that attacking will result in total annihilation for all sides, no one will attack. That is insane, Yelenis said. By our standards. Yes, Vrentak agreed. But it worked. For many decades, the humans maintained peace through the constant threat of species-wide extinction. He scrolled through more of the historical data. Their entire society is built on this foundation of competitive conflict. They divide themselves into groups based on geography, ideology, ethnicity, and dozens of other factors. And these groups compete against each other constantly. That should make them weak, Krellinis observed. Internal division has destroyed countless civilizations throughout galactic history. That is what we would expect, Vrentak said. But the humans have developed something that counteracts this weakness. He pulled up a new section of the data. When faced with an external threat, humans possess the ability to temporarily set aside their internal conflicts and unite against the common enemy. He showed examples from human history. Wars where former enemies had become allies. Natural disasters where rival nations had sent aid to each other. And planetary threats where the entire species had worked together. Despite centuries of hatred and division, they have a concept they call humanity, Vrentak explained. An identity that transcends all of their internal divisions. When this identity is threatened by an outside force, all humans become allies regardless of their previous conflicts. They can simply ignore their differences? Talvex asked, struggling to understand. Not ignore them, Vrentak replied. They remember their differences, sometimes with intense hatred. But they are capable of deciding that those differences are less important than survival. At least temporarily. He highlighted a phrase that appeared repeatedly throughout human history. They have many sayings that express this idea. One of the most common translates roughly as "the enemy of my enemy is my friend." Commander Talvex felt a new kind of fear settling into his hearts. Different from the terror inspired by human biology and technology, a species that fought among itself constantly would eventually weaken and collapse. This was the natural order of things, and the Valkyrie had watched it happen to dozens of civilizations throughout their history. But a species that could fight among itself while still maintaining the ability to unite against external threats, that was something far more dangerous. Such a species would be constantly strengthening itself through internal competition, while also being capable of presenting a unified front against any invader. "Tell me about their warriors," Talvex ordered. "How do they select and train those who fight in their conflicts?" Rentak pulled up data on human military traditions, and his scales shifted to an even paler shade. "They do not select warriors the way we do," he said. "Among the Valkyrie, warriors are born into the warrior caste and trained from birth for combat. They are the elite of our society, superior to ordinary citizens in every way." "How do humans choose their warriors?" Yelenis asked. "In many cases, anyone can become a warrior," Rentek replied. "Humans from all segments of their society can volunteer to join their military forces. Farmers, workers, even children have taken up arms when circumstances demanded it." He showed images of human soldiers from throughout history, ranging from ancient warriors in leather and metal to modern soldiers in advanced combat armor, and their training methods are brutal by any standard. They deliberately subject their recruits to extreme physical stress, psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, hunger, and pain. "That sounds like torture," Krelinus observed. "It is designed to simulate the conditions of actual combat," Rentak explained. "Humans believe that only by experiencing suffering in training can their soldiers be prepared to handle suffering in battle." He pulled up specific training programs used by elite human military units. Their most advanced warriors undergo training that kills a significant percentage of candidates. Those who survive are considered among the most dangerous individual beings in human society. They train their soldiers with methods that kill some of them, Talvex asked, disbelief clear in his voice. They believe that only by facing death can a warrior learn to overcome the fear of it, Rentek replied, and the evidence suggests this approach is effective. Human soldiers have achieved combat victories against overwhelming odds that would be considered impossible for any other species. He highlighted numerous examples from human military history. Small groups of humans defeating armies many times their size. Individual soldiers fighting to the death rather than surrendering. And entire populations resisting invasion even when victory seemed impossible. They have a concept they call never surrender, Rentek said. A belief that as long as a human is capable of fighting, they should continue to fight regardless of the odds against them, even when victory is impossible? Yelenis asked, especially when victory is impossible. Rentek confirmed. Humans take a strange pride in fighting against insurmountable odds. They celebrate warriors who chose death over surrender, who fought to the last breath even when escape was possible. Commander Talvex walked to the main viewing window of the bridge, staring out at the distant human ship that had seemed so primitive just a short time ago. He had begun this day believing that the Valkyrie were the masters of the galaxy, that no species could challenge their dominion, that their reign would continue for another 12,000 cycles and beyond. Now, he understood that everything he had believed was built on a foundation of ignorance. There is one more thing. Commander, Rentek said, his voice carrying a tone of grim finality. Talvex turned back to face his communications officer, bracing himself for whatever new horror awaited. The humans have not yet achieved true interstellar capability, Rentek said. That ship out there is one of their most advanced vessels, but their technology is still developing. In another 100 cycles, perhaps less, they will likely surpass our current capabilities. You were saying they will become more dangerous than they already are? Talvex asked. Much more dangerous, Rentic confirmed. Their rate of technological advancement is unlike anything in our records. They have gone from primitive ground transportation to spacefly. Commander Talvex had just finished ordering Rentek to prepare a priority transmission to the Dominion Council when every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. Commander! Navigation Officer Krelinus shouted over the cacophony. The human vessel is changing course. They are moving directly toward us. Talvex felt his 4 hearts freeze in his chest. How did they detect us? He demanded. We are operating under full stealth protocols. I do not know, Krelinus replied, her claws dancing frantically across her console. But they have locked their sensors on our position and are accelerating at a rate that should be impossible for a ship of their mass. Science Officer Yelinus pulled up the sensor data, her scales flickering through shades of panic. Their engines are producing thrust levels that we calculated should tear their ship apart, she said. But they are maintaining structural integrity somehow. Helm, prepare for emergency acceleration, Talvex ordered. Plot a course for the nearest Dominion outpost. But before the helm officer could respond, Communications Officer Vrentak interrupted with a voice that carried an edge of something. Talvex could not immediately identify Commander. We are receiving a transmission from the human vessel. The bridge fell silent. Every officer frozen at their stations. A transmission meant the humans knew they were there. Knew they had been watching, knew they had been scanning. Put it through, Talvex ordered. His voice steady despite the terror churning in his stomachs. The main display flickered and then resolved into an image that Talvex would remember for the rest of his life. A human female stared out from the screen. Her face arranged in an expression that Talvex could not interpret, but that somehow made his scales crawl with instinctive fear. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, revealing features that seemed somehow both soft and hard at the same time. Her eyes were the most disturbing element. 2 small orbs of dark color that seemed to see directly through the display and into Talvex, Larry's soul. Unidentified vessel, the human said, her voice carrying through the bridge speakers with a clarity that suggested extremely advanced communication technology. We detected your scanning beams approximately 3 standard hours ago. Talvex forced himself to respond, drawing on every ounce of diplomatic training he had received throughout his career. I am Commander Talvex of the Velkari Dominion scout vessel Serenity of Purpose, he said. We were conducting a routine survey of this sector and detected your vessel. Our scans were intended only for scientific cataloging purposes. The human female tilted her head slightly, a gesture that Talvex interpreted as curiosity, but that also somehow seemed predatory. Scientific cataloging, she repeated, and her mouth curved upward in an expression that exposed her teeth. Talvex had studied enough of the human data to know this was called a smile and was intended to convey friendliness. But those teeth, those flat grinding teeth at the front and those sharp tearing teeth at the sides, they made the expression look like a threat rather than a greeting. We have been observing your observation, the human continued. Your technology is quite impressive. Your scanning beams are more advanced than anything we have encountered before. You were able to detect our scans and trace them back to our position, Talvex said, unable to keep a note of admiration from his voice, despite his fear. We have had a lot of practice detecting things that do not want to be detected, the human replied. It comes from spending most of our history trying to detect each other. She paused, her dark eyes studying Talvex through the display. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth ship Indomitable, she said, and I suspect you have learned quite a bit about us from your scientific cataloging. Talvex hesitated, unsure how to respond. Lying seemed pointless, given how much the humans had apparently observed. but admitting the full extent of their knowledge seemed dangerous. "We have gathered some preliminary data," he finally said. "Preliminary data," Captain Chen repeated, and something in her tone suggested she was amused. "Commander, we detected your scans accessing our historical databases, our medical records, our military specifications, and the personal files of several crew members." Talvek's S-scales shifted toward a darker shade, the Valkyrie equivalent of embarrassment. "I apologize if we violated any protocols," he said. "We are unfamiliar with human customs regarding privacy." "No need to apologize," Captain Chen replied, and her smile widened slightly. "We would have done the same thing in your position." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes seeming to bore directly into Talvek's, despite the vast distance between their ships. "In fact, we have been scanning your vessel while we talked. Your living crystal hull is fascinating, and your power generation technology is at least several centuries ahead of ours." Talvex felt a chill run through his scales. The humans had been scanning the serenity of purpose this entire time, and their sensors were advanced enough to penetrate Valkyrie stealth technology. "I imagine you have some concerns about what you found in our records," Captain Chun continued, her tone becoming more serious. "We are aware that our species can seem rather intimidating to others." "Intimidating is not the word I would choose," Talvex replied. Before he could stop himself, Captain Chun's smile faded, replaced by an expression that seemed almost understanding. "Let me be direct with you, Commander Talvex," she said. "We know that your dominion has conquered and absorbed many species throughout this region of space. Your records are not as well protected as you might believe." Talvex's S4 hearts began racing. "We also know that you have been evaluating us as a potential threat or target," Captain Chun continued. "And I want to assure you that we have no interest in conflict with your dominion." She paused, and her expression shifted to something that looked almost gentle. "Humanity has spent most of its existence fighting itself," she said. "We have only recently begun reaching out to the stars, and we would very much prefer to find friends out here rather than enemies." Talvex wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that these terrifying creatures could be allies rather than adversaries, but everything he had learned about humans suggested that their friendliness could shift to violence in an instant if they felt threatened. "How can we trust that your intentions are peaceful?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could consider its implications. Captain Chen's expression did not change, but something in her eyes seemed to harden. "You cannot," she said simply. "Just as we cannot fully trust that your dominion's intentions toward us are peaceful." She leaned back slightly, her posture relaxing in a way that somehow made her seem more dangerous rather than less. "What I can tell you is this. We humans have a saying about hoping for the best while preparing for the worst." She gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show images from inside the indomitable rows of soldiers in combat armor stood at attention. Weapons held ready, missiles sat in their launchers, warheads armed and targeting systems active, and in what appeared to be the ship's command center, dozens of humans worked at their stations with the focused intensity of predators, watching their prey. "We genuinely hope for peace." "Commander," Captain Chun said, her voice carrying a weight that made Talvex's scales prickle. "We want to explore this galaxy, meet new species, learn new things, and build a future where all intelligent life can thrive together." Her smile returned, but this time there was no attempt to make it appear friendly. "But we are also very, very good at war." She let that statement hang in the silence between them for several heartbeats before continuing. "The choice of which humanity you meet is entirely up to you and your dominion." Talvex found himself unable to respond, his mind overwhelmed by the impossible combination of threat and welcome that this human had delivered. "I suggest you return to your leaders and share what you have learned," Captain Chun said. Tell them that humanity is willing to be friends with anyone who approaches us with respect and good faith." She paused, and her dark eyes seemed to drill directly into Talvek's soul. "And tell them that we strongly recommend they take that offer." The transmission ended, and the bridge of the Serenity of Purpose fell into absolute silence. Commander Talvex stood frozen for several moments, processing everything that had just occurred. Then he turned to face his crew, his scales having shifted to a color that none of them had ever seen before. The color of certainty mixed with profound fear. "Helm," he said, his voice carrying a calm that he did not feel. "Set course for the Dominion capital at maximum speed. What message shall I prepare for the Council?" Rentic asked. Talvex considered the question carefully, knowing that his words might determine the future relationship between the Valkyrie, Dominion, and this terrifying new species. "Tell them that we have made contact with a species called humanity," he said. "Tell them everything we have learned about human biology, psychology, technology, and history." He paused, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "And tell them that I strongly recommend we accept their offer of friendship. What if the Council decides otherwise?" Yelenis asked quietly. Talvex turned to look at the display, where the human ship Indomitable was already turning away, returning to its original course as if the encounter had been nothing more than a minor interruption. "Then tell them that we should pray to every god the Valkyrie have ever worshipped," Talvex replied. "Because if humanity decides that the galaxy